Deb Cupp, President of Microsoft United States, joins me on the podcast today. Deb, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me about leadership.
Super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Deb, I'm so curious on your background. Of course, I've done a lot of research coming into this conversation, just looking at your tremendous journey, not just from a career, logo, and branding perspective, but the impact that you've had across multiple different organizations, lives, customers, and partners, etc. And so I want to start the conversation off with just talking a little bit about your journey and how it started, like that very first job, how
Yeah.
it all started and then got you into the position that you're in today.
Yeah, well, it started super early. I mean, I actually started probably most people. I mean, I started working when I was 13. I was babysitting, so I always felt like I wanted to be doing something in addition to whatever was going on with school and sports and things like that. So my first real job was out when I got out of college was working as a rep, actually, a sales rep for a small software company, healthcare software company at the time. So that was the first one that was official, but I think I've always kind of worked at during summers, and I did phone sales for USA Today at one point. Like, I've done all sorts of different stuff. So I've always kind of been interested in making sure that I can, at that time, make some money to make sure I could pay for school and do all those types of things. So always was super focused on growing and learning and figuring things out from an
I love
early start, I guess.
I love the early start there. I loved how you described some of those roles as well, just in terms of taking them on for the right reasons to make an impact and obviously get remunerated for it, right?
Yeah.
When you think about your career, right? Because of course, from there on, it just went uphill, just in terms of roles and elevation and the impact that you've had along the way. Were there any specific things that you think you'd had to perform or highlight that made you stand out to be recognized and put in a position to get into some of those senior roles that you've been in?
It's funny. I've never been a person who was thinking, oh, I need to do this to get the next job, or I better make sure I stand out in order to be noticed. I'm sort of a heads down, gritty, get the job done kind of person. So I've always felt like if I do my job well, if I progress in my career from a learning perspective, if I impact people around me in a positive way, whether that's customers or partners or people that work with me, I felt like the rest would sort of work itself out. So that's probably not great advice, everybody who's watching this, but in my world, I always just felt like do your job well, focus on what matters, and pay attention to outcomes. And that for me was always something that I focused on. It certainly didn't mean I didn't know what job potential was out there, but I wasn't zeroed in on the next thing. I always felt like do the thing you're in as well as you can. And then the next thing hopefully will present itself.
So it's really that doing the best you can with what you have and
Yep.
continuing to do it for the right reasons, to continue to be on that journey of growth and impact. But rather the intention behind it is to maximize on the impact that you have in what you're doing versus thinking about the output and the next level, right? And the next role. And that's how it's kind of played out for you based on what I'm hearing. And of course,
Yes.
Microsoft President of the United States. So you have a big role. You're responsible for a very large organization, customers, partners, society, the impact that the country has on multiple other countries across the world. Diving into leadership, of course, a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. I'm super curious about some of the leadership themes and principles you apply to be impactful and effective across all those different components of individuals and teams and businesses.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think number one is just listening and learning. I mean, you don't know as much as everybody else around you. So, for me is always pay attention to those who are working with you or for you or whatever the case may be to understand their business and what they're trying to do. I think that teaches you volumes in terms of how you can support them. So my perspective on any organization, big or small, is you have to understand what the people with you are trying to do, and you have to figure out how to support them in accomplishing their objectives. And that ultimately accomplishes yours. It always rolls its way up. So I start at the people. I spend a lot of time learning about what motivates people, how they're wired, what makes them tick. Everybody's different. So even your own leadership team, how each individual wants to interact, how they frequency of interaction, small things like that are things I think about early on when I start engaging. And then I think a lot about, what are the themes that are most critical to us as a business? What, again, are the outcomes that we're accountable for the company and for the organization? And then how do we align everything to that? So to get super clear, super focused. When you work in a big organization, it's easy for people to get distracted. It's very easy. So I think part of my job or my leadership principle is always to just remove noise, create clarity. And at Microsoft, we have leadership principles around create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. And I align very closely to that. So for me, it's very specific as to how I think about the work that we do every single day. So it's a lot, but I think you have to think about everybody else and sort of how they all work together and how we can maximize that to be as successful as possible.
It's kind of really being intentional with that insatiable desire of curiosity just in everybody
Yes.
you engage with and in everything
Yes.
that you're responsible for, right? And really digesting that and then applying that to the actual outcome. And the application of that is through an extensive level of clarity and energy, right? And so I love that. And, so just applying a lot of those themes and principles just in a normal world, I would say, is probably, I guess, normal.
Yeah.
But the perpetual elephant in the room just around the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm super curious around your art and science around applying some of those themes and principles, being effective with it, creating clarity with it as well during this very, very challenging situation that we've all been in recently.
Yeah, I think it's empathy plays an enormous role. I think as we've been living through the pandemic for the period of time that we have, you have to understand the environment that others are in order to make sure that you're creating the best space for them to do their best work. So simple things around allowing people flexibility in time. It's okay if people's dogs or kids walk into the room if they're working virtually. Taking some of the stress out of the interactions so people can actually focus on their best work and being intentional about it. And I think modeling or leading by example is incredibly important. So I don't take myself too seriously. I think that helps people, in terms of the formality of work. I think we're trying to pull some of that out so people feel a little more safe and comfortable in the environments that they're in. I think just having patience. One of the things I say all the time is assume best intent. Assume every interaction you're having with somebody, even if they're having a bad day, they're in a bad mood, don't assume something about them. You don't know what experience they're having. So I always say, try to go into every conversation with assuming best intent. And I think that has just rang very true for me as we've worked through the pandemic, because you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And I think if we all approach things with that clarity, with that empathy, and with positive assumption and positive intent, you get a much better interaction out of it. So we learn as we go too. So I think that's super important. You might have a game plan. That game plan might not actually pan itself out given the circumstance that you're in. So I think people just have to also allow for that flexibility and agility so that you can react or adjust based on whatever your market condition is, or environmental condition, or economic condition, or health condition, whatever it might be.
I love that. And it ties so much into what you mentioned earlier on, right? Just in terms of having that insatiable curiosity just by listening and understanding, and then obviously displaying a level of empathy just in terms of not assuming, but really trying to understand exactly the position of the individuals that you're representing and working with.
Yeah.
And, taking that into some of the research that I've done on your profile, of course, your title team player, you have
Yes.
a very evident and authentic display for a passion of teamwork, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. In addition to the things you've talked about around
Yeah.
curiosity and empathy and creating clarity, teamwork, what does that mean and why is that so important to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's like the core of how I operate. And I grew up playing sports, team sports. There's something in that, the power of watching, people achieve things they didn't think they could. Watching and experiencing going through things that are harder than you thought, sometimes failing together. You learn a lot. I always think you learn more from things that you didn't achieve than the things that you do. And that has always resonated for me. It just gives me passion. It gives me energy. I'm so kind of keyed into how we put people in positions, whether it was sports long ago or now at work, that you put people in the positions that create incredible strength for the team as a whole. And I'm a firm believer that you get way more out of people together collectively than you do as individuals. And when that is humming, when that's working well, I don't think there's anything more exciting for me. Like, I love to watch that. And whether it's just, in our world, if we're working with a customer to try to accomplish an objective, and that's a team that might even exist just for a period of time, you're watching the outcome of that experience and the learning that everybody gets from everybody else. You know, we're not all good at everything. So I think when you put a team together in the right way, the strengths shine through and it helps everybody raise the bar. And I love it. I mean, you can probably tell I have a huge amount of passion around it. It's just fun to watch. It's fun to experience. And I think everybody gains. And it's an incredibly positive opportunity for people when done well.
I love the reference to sport as well. Go Eagles, by the way. I'm just going to say
Yeah.
You know, one of the things you said there, which I love actually, is sometimes you learn more from the things you didn't achieve versus the things that you do achieve, right? And it kind of goes into the next question that I want to talk about because, you know, again, from my research, I've learned that you really have a passion in addition to the teamwork and some of the other things we talked about. You have this passion for solving complex situations, and you kind of described it there as well, where you talked about just looking at the results from collaboration and getting together as a team, right? Now, when I think about solving complex situations, you know, sometimes it can sound a bit intimidating, like taking on complex, because it's outside the comfort zone, right? And you display a passion for doing that. So tell me a little bit about where does that come from?
Yeah, I think I don't know why. I just like hard problems. So I think things that, you know, maybe it's just, you know, I grew up in an environment where we were, you know, kind of gritty and we got after things and, you know, we pushed hard and we learned as fast as we could. And, you know, I sort of have a little bit of a, you know, when someone says we can't accomplish something, makes me want to accomplish it even more. So I'm competitive by spirit. So I think that's part of it. But I think there's something unique in creating solutions to complex problems or new problems. So it just might be something that you haven't foreseen before, or companies starting a new entity or, you know, a new business line. There's just newness to the challenge that you can apply certainly a lot of things you've learned, but you need something a little bit different to be successful. Part of it, I think, is the fact that I'm just generally curious. So I want to understand what could we do differently or better to attack that. Part of it is just the energy of learning. Like I like to learn. I'm also a learner by nature. So what can I learn from that experience that I haven't learned before and that can benefit the team or the outcome even more? So for me, it's just sort of arranging in a way that says, how do we figure out how to solve this thing that's hard? And I like to try to do things that we may not have done in the past. So can we try it? Can we tweak it? Can we do something differently that can have a meaningful outcome? And, you know, sometimes that doesn't always work, right? So, you know, you have experiences where that falls on its face, but that's a learning in itself. So, you know, the opportunity to say, okay, that didn't work. Like, let's try to shift it this way. And here's why. So I think the experience itself is incredibly powerful.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, right?
Yeah.
We talked about creating clarity. We talked about having curiosity. We talked about generating energy. We talked about leading with empathy, teamwork, and solving complex problems, right? And every one of those things that we've talked about, you've just displayed this excitement and this passion and this elevation in energy as you talked about that, right? And I can tell you've obviously experienced a lot of the goods and the bads, the positives and the negatives of all those key components throughout your journey. And when you look back at your journey, right, just in terms of thinking about all those experiences that you've had, as a leader, of course, you've obviously had a very, very significant impact in all those areas. If I were to ask you if there was one thing that you're super proud of when you look back at your leadership journey and all the impacts that you've had, what would you say that would be?
It's people. It's always people. So I think that, you know, when someone reaches out to me that I haven't talked to in 15 years and just says, I still remember, you know, what it was like to work for you, or I still remember working on that really crazy project with you, or, you know, the way that you showed up that day to support me made all the difference. That's what matters. People forget the rest, right? So you don't always remember what it was that you accomplished or how it got done. You remember how you feel. So for me, that's leadership. That's what I'm most proud of, is when I feel like I've actually impacted a person to feel good about what they do, to realize potential that they didn't know they had, and to celebrate it. Like, that's the coolest thing in the world. Everything else is a step, but I think the people that you touch, and the people that hopefully benefit from that experience, that's the coolest thing ever.
Celebrating those great moments, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, I love
totally.
that. Deb, advice time, selfishly
Yeah,
as well.
of course. Always.
What are pieces of advice you would give to leaders that are earlier in their career right now, you know, really looking to make an impact?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I'm a huge fan of being super authentic. So I think when you're starting early in your career, you see somebody or something and you think, oh, I need to emulate that behavior, or I should be showing up that way. Forget all that. Like, be you. You is the best thing. You trying to be something else is not. So I'm a huge fan of authenticity, and that's something I would absolutely tell everyone. The other thing I would say is don't assume everybody knows everything. You always think because someone's the boss understands and knows and they must be right. They're not. They're there to learn just as much as you are. So I think I would encourage people to figure out ways to provide input and to be a part of solutions and not be afraid to lean into things, because sometimes it's scary. Like, you don't want to take that step forward, but there's so much value in that learning. Again, whether you succeed or you fail, I think I would encourage people to take calculated, smart risks, so that they have a chance to experience what that's like. And it's amazing. That's where you do so much of your learning. So those are some of the things that I think about as I look back. I wish someone might have said to me, early on. Maybe they would have said it, I probably wouldn't have listened. You know how it goes when you're starting. You think you're like, oh no, I have to do it this way, but
Yeah.
but that's the reality. Like, I think it's just, if I had to say of all those things, the one that matters the most is the authenticity, because people can sniff it out in 5 minutes if you aren't yourself. Just be you, and that you is enough. And I think that's something that people have to really get comfortable with.
Well, thank you for being you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. It's a
You bet.
great way of putting it. It's really that authenticity, that being unassuming as well, really curiosity and understanding individuals. And then also a key thing that you mentioned there is really, it's not a bad thing to go outside the comfort zone. It's not a bad
Yes.
thing to really take on challenging tasks or intimidating
Yes.
tasks at points, right? Last question for you, Deb.
Yeah, sure.
I'm super excited for everything that you are doing and going to be doing in this role that you're in. I'm super excited to witness the impact across the teams and the businesses that you're having as well. And I love following and watching, and also watching some of your videos and your podcast, by the way. Pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Uh, much further down the line from now, when it's all said
Yeah.
and done, when the journey is all over, what is the
Yep.
one thing that you want to be known for?
I think it ties to what I said before. I think I want to be known for impacting people in a really positive way. Like, I just want people to say, "Oh, I remember her. Like, she made me feel good about myself. She made me try something I didn't think I could do. She encouraged me to push myself in an area that I was uncomfortable. She just made me have fun at work. Like, that's it. For me, it's simple. I think I don't have big aspirations to be known for some amazing thing that I've accomplished. I want people just to remember the experience that they had, and that my hope is that there's many people that feel like I had a positive impact that made their day better.
That's amazing. What a place to leave it. Thank you so much. This has
You
been
bet.
brilliant. Exceptional conversation. I enjoyed it, and it was a great learning opportunity for me as well. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.